I started about 8 or 10 years ago, had discomfort over a growing church facility, looking at doing little predictions and seeing that we're going to grow out of it. And even though I live in Kansas City, the north side, land is not anywhere near, probably a couple zeros less than what it is here. It was still too much for us to think about, and so we started asking some crazy questions like, is there a scalable model to do church? Is there some model that's not bounded by facility and resources? And as a result of that, we began looking around for things. At the same time, we were praying for 300,000 people. If you put a pin map in a map and you take 30 minutes out, because that's where the church growth experts say people drive 30 minutes to go to church, at least in the Midwest, and draw a circle. There's 300,000 people in that circle. So we began to pray for those 300,000 people. We prayed that God would make it hard for them to go to hell as a result of us being there. And we prayed regularly, hard, and then one night, something really strange happened. I don't know where you are on the theological spectrum, but I graduated from Dallas Theological Seminary. And and you probably know that people who graduate from Dallas Seminary are theologically opposed to dreaming, but I had a dream. And that dream, God showed me an answer to our prayers, and that was that all 300,000 people decided to come on Sunday morning. And, even though, this is the Silicon Valley where miracles happen, you probably don't have any place where 300,000 people can gather without a traffic nightmare. Mm-hmm. And that's what happened in the dream, is it turned to a nightmare, because I was watching people, all these levels of different stages and different people in different ways. Your classic mom and dad and 2 kids getting into their car, and we were right next to a Ford plant where you've got 5,000 workers getting off in the morning, and them driving their Ford F-150s all our parking lot. And then we're not too far from a strip mall or a strip bar road where all the strip bars are, whatever, and people rolling out of there, strippers coming out of there, and guys coming out of there, and all that kind of stuff, and just every part of humanity coming. And unfortunately, it was this massive nightmare because it got stuck. And it led me to rethink about, we don't even have a strategy. If we pray for these amazing things for God, we don't have a strategy that can do that. And so we began a worldwide hunt, and that led us, across different places to Africa and India, and watching what was going on there, and began to be mentored. City team connected us with a lot of incredible disciple-making people, and it began a learning process for me, a radical transformation in my own thinking. So much so that I'm not sure Dallas Seminary would still claim me. But I started asking some basic questions. True or false? Does Jesus command us to make disciples in Matthew 28? I used to answer that true, and I learned to answer it false. Because he doesn't command us to make disciple-making. He doesn't command us to make disciples. He commands us to make disciple-making disciples. And from the moment I came to Christ, I was a disciple-maker. I believed in this whole idea of multiplication. And I have a genealogy, a family tree that you could look at. People will come to my funeral, say wonderful things about me, but it's only at that point it was only one generation deep. Because I was trying to make disciples out of my passions, my giftedness, and my training. And the people I was discipling didn't have the same passions, nor the same training, nor the same giftedness. So they could not repeat the process. Again, they could not make disciples. And I came to ask myself, are they bound by the Great Commission like I am? And the answer was yes. They're bound to make disciples too. Jesus' final command. And so I had to back up and realize that the Great Commission spoke to my methodology as well as it spoke to the outcomes that Jesus was looking at. So my methodology needed to be simple and repeatable by anyone, despite their education, training, giftedness, passions. And a lot of that led me into understanding what it looked like to make disciple-making disciples. And we began that process of trying to implement that. Of course, at the same time, I planted a church. I'd gone off, like many people did, to Willow Creek, and one winter in 1993, and Bill Hybels gave his impassioned plea. I had just come off of a job working on the national staff of the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and I was kind of looking for employment. I was looking for employment in Colorado. I had hoped that I could work for a not-for-profit during the week and ski on the weekends, and have it both ways. And sitting in that left field bleachers at Willow Creek, my wife turned to me after Bill Hybels gave his passion plea and said, "I think you could do this." And I was like, "Do what?" I think you could lead a church like this. And that simple conversation led to staying right where we were in Kansas City on the northeast side and planting a local church called Shoal Creek. So when this dream and all this kind is coming up, I've got this bricks and mortar, very successful in many ways. It's grown from 6 people to 1,000 people. It's a little unique in the sense is that we kind of drank the Willow Creek Cup all the way down, and still are there. We don't do any musical worship on Sunday morning. I know it's hard for most people to believe that a church like that could exist, but it does. People always ask me, well, "What do you do then?" Really, it's all church is about, 4 chords and a Chris Tomlin guy up there, So we kind of looked at this thing, and I had another experience. God kind of speaks to me through experiences. My mother-in-law wants to buy a car. My mother-in-law is 87 right now. About every 6 months she buys something new. And that's what her life's all about, is getting something new. I think it convinces her that death is still that much further away because she's got new stuff in front of her. So she wanted a new car, and I thought it'd be cool for her to get a hybrid car. I thought, hey, you're 87, that'd be cool. Be kind of like the old lady who's saving the planet thing. And so I have a friend who has a hybrid car, and he said, "Why don't you test drive it with her?" So she wanted me to drive it, and I'm driving it, and we go to the grocery store, and my mother-in-law wants to we're on a test drive, and she wants to go to the grocery store. She's kind of cheap. And so she goes in, and I do the kind of illegal thing. I sit outside the front door, in a place where you're not supposed to park. But if you're in the car, I feel like it's safe. I can do that. And I'm waiting for her to come out. And she comes out with these 2 bags of groceries, gets in, and I take off. And when I take off, there was a lady coming out the door, and she had her cart, and she was walking, very forcefully. And I'm thinking, well, she's going to, obviously, she understands I'm pulling out here. She's going to yield to me as I go and that kind of stuff. But she doesn't. She walks right in front of me. And I hit the brakes, and she looks at me like, "You fool," and I look at her like, "You fool." And then all of a sudden I realized, as I downloaded that experience, what happened, and I realized I'm in a hybrid car, and when a hybrid car takes off, it uses the electric side of the engine. It doesn't use the gas side of the engine. The gas side is used to keep it at speed. The electric side is used to get it to speed. She didn't hear the engine roar. She was living in, I was living in a different world. And all of a sudden, that imagery became an understanding for me of what it looks like to take this place-based church. This thing has got a pin in the map, and it's got bricks and mortar. And also, another engine in that. We have a gasoline engine, which is the traditional church we say to our community every Sunday. "All you who are weary and heavy laden, come unto me and I will give you rest." We feel like we're the voice of Jesus in our community. There's not 7 days that goes by that someone couldn't walk in that door. Half the people who visit at Shoal Creek visit because they drive by. You have no relational connection whatsoever. So there's still, despite what Alan Hirsch says when he describes it, that the millennials are running away from church and all this kind of stuff, we still experience people when they get married, have a baby, run into marital problems, get sick, lose their jobs. When they are in need, there is still an echo. As much as they might have a distaste for these, crosses and buildings and stuff like that, there's still a sense in which they come, at least in our culture. So we didn't want to give that up. There are people who said, "You should stop doing what you're doing." And it was like, well, I get, right now, as we kind of measure things, we're big on metrics. We have 5 to 7 families visit every week. And those 5 to 7 families self-identify, if they stay there long enough, after 6 months, as half of them self-identify as non-believers. So you figure at the low end, that's 20 families a month. That's 10 families, half of that, 10 non-believing families walking in. And I'm thinking, it may not be the most effective thing in the world, but it's more effective than anything else I know. And so we're not shutting that down. We like doing it. We have fun doing it, and so we're keeping it. But then we added this electric engine side, this side that says go. And so we kind of refer to it as our come and go strategy. And the go strategy is simply training people how to invite their friends and neighbors to the table to read the Bible and discover what God has to say about life. We don't really train people how to do evangelism anymore. We just train them to invite their friends to read the Bible. Now, American Bible Society has done a study last year that says that 67% of the American population still wants to know more about the Bible. And that lives out for us because about 6 out of every 10 people that our folks, neighbors, workmates, schoolmates, about 6 out of every 10 that get invited to a discovery group say yes. And so when you've got a trusted relationship, when people look across at you and say, I don't think you sacrifice chickens in your backyard, you're not weird. You may be weird in all the right ways. You're not weird in all the wrong ways. They want to know more about the Bible. And when they know it's an atmosphere of discovery, we're going to read the Bible together. We're going to learn what God has to say about life. It's an atmosphere of obedience. We ask people to walk away with a statement that says, if this is God speaking, what are you going to do today? And we also ask them to share with someone what God's doing in their life. And then we ask them the next week when they come back, how'd it go? Who'd you share with? And that kind of stuff. We don't let our groups grow. We force them to multiply. That's very difficult in a Western suburban society. It's got sort of tolerance. Everybody wants to be on the thing. We try to keep them small, let them multiply. We train our leaders. We discovered that in a typical attractional model like ours, there's about a 3.5-year growth curve. So people come in, and they come in, and there's usually a dip. There's always a dip because for the good news to be good news, it has to be bad news first. Until they understand they're helpless and hopeless, lost without Jesus, then the spiritual journey doesn't really have traction. So there's a dip. But then that S-curve starts, and once that spiritual life explodes, they begin to invite anybody and everybody to come and to this place where they have experienced transformation. And again, it's just hip pocket stuff that we look at and just keep our eyes on it. But we tell them about 50% of your families or your friends will come, and 50% of them won't. And so go ahead and invite, and invite aggressively, but realize that at some point we kind of see that as about a 3.5-year period where the invitation becomes an aggravation. Someone has been invited and invited and invited and invited and invited and invited, and it's like, stop. I'm not coming. I don't care if Jesus shows up next Sunday morning. I'm not coming to your church. Not going to happen. And for many people, it's not even a negative thing. The younger you go down the line, it's not even a category in their thinking. We think, people think spiritual church. It's not a category that they think. They think spiritual, go to a sweat hut, find an Indian reservation to go to. Or so they think that kind of stuff. They don't think of a church as being a genuine place of spirituality. And so we encourage them to say, look, as you move along this curve, you're going to have to learn how to take the gospel and plant it in your neighborhood, where you live, learn, work, or play. We're praying that God would give you eyes for one of those 4 fields. And so we train them in how to invite their neighbors, their workmates, their friends to the table, and learn to read the Bible and see what God has to say about life. We call them to a discipled life. We feel like that's what Jesus called his followers to, a discipled life. And so they learn how to do that over time. And when they begin to feel that irritation come, it's like, okay, my relational connections, your relational connections, their relational connections don't grow exponentially. There are a few exceptions. There, the kind of people that talk to people in the elevator, perfect strangers. There are a few of those kind of superseder evangelist type people, but by and large, most of us, our relational connections don't grow exponentially. And so at some point, they've got to learn to go. And so we use this hybrid metaphor for them to understand how we would say two different things. For instance, when we're training, and we call our groups two different things, just to distinguish what happens on one side of that metaphor as on the other. The groups that we organize are just like groups that you all have. You know, we call them journey groups. But they use this discovery process in the journey groups as well. It's our training ground for when this 3.5-year point hits, to be able to kick them out and to move out in the communities. On the go side, or the electric engine side, we call them discovery groups. And so when we train, we train our discovery group leaders to not invite people back to Shoal Creek. We don't want them coming back. We want the gospel on this side to go away from us. And you know, I have a lot of pastors who will call me and say, tell me about this thing, I'd like to know. And I always say, look, let's cut to the chase here. Let me just ask you one question. This is kind of litmus test type stuff. If what we're going to talk about is never going to add another $1 to the offering, you know, another butt in the seat, or another volunteer in the nursery, are you still willing to talk? Because the fact is that most of us, because we get paid for growing a church, not growing the kingdom, tend to be more interested in growing the church than we are the kingdom. And so there is a mindset shift that has to take place to say, I can get excited about things happening that are never going to benefit me. They're going to see the kingdom take root in my community and the gospel spread, but it's not going to be coming back to me. So on one side, we train our group leaders, don't invite. On the other side, on Sunday morning, we'll say, invite, 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 invite. It looks like we're saying two different things. And that's the reason we had to come up with the hybrid analogy, was to help people understand why it is we would have two different engines in the same container. The engines serve a larger purpose. And that purpose is to move. It's transportation in a car. And for us, you know, it's the Great Commission. It's Jesus called us to teach people to obey every command. And so we're attempting to bring heaven to earth in that, using that metaphor. So I'll stop there. Cool. We can go.